Welcome to another episode of SAARC Regional Virtual Cybersecurity Conference 2022. Today, we are conducting a panel discussion organized by ISC2 Colombo Chapter. The topic for today's discussion is breaches and infiltration, what keeps CISOs up at night. First, to discuss this very interesting topic, I have few illustrious guests with me today. First, we have Dharani Fernando, a chartered insurer and certified insurance specialist at George Stewart Insurance Brokers Limited. And we have Suresh Emmanuel, Chief Information Security Officer at National Bank PLC, Sri Lanka. And we also have Shiranta Pires, Head of Information Security at Mobitel Private Limited, Sri Lanka. I'm Lasant Priyankara, Secretary at ISC2 Colombo Chapter, and I'll be your moderator for this session. First off, Dharani, Suresh, Shiranta, thank you very much for taking the time of your busy schedules to be a part of this discussion. On behalf of ISC2 Colombo Chapter, I would warmly welcome this illustrious panel and all of you wonderful audience. Without further ado, let's jump into the discussion to set the tone for the discussion. We'll start with the topic itself. Suresh, can you help us understand what are the challenges that keep CISOs awake at night?
Okay, thank you, Lasanta. I think, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you, ISC2, for inviting me for this very interesting panel discussion. So, as a CISO, I mean, with the extensive experience, especially in the financial sector. So, so what are the things wakes us up in the night? So obviously, you know, the rapid the space of the data breaches are taking place globally. That's one of the key concerns when it comes to, for example, you know, recently the sensitive data leakage of NATO due to a cyber attack. And Samsung recently got exposed their personal information due to a data breach. Then we all talked about the Uber internal system compromise. Actually, it's by an 18-year-old. So I mean, it's quite interesting fact. The one of the global giant, one of the globally, I mean, well diversified, the multinational company got breached by 18-year-old. And you know, recently Akamai has blocked one of the largest DDoS attack ever given for the basically for the Europe region. So I think that's one of the largest ever blocked by Akamai. So even if you take the reason, the Twitter zero-day exploit, which explodes about closely about 5.5 million accounts. So those are the kind of the criticality of this the rapidly, you know, the overwhelming amount of cyber attacks taking place globally. You know, as a CISO, when it comes to one of the key concerns you will have is the lack of visibility, I would say. So you should have a clear understanding, especially what is happening in your organization environment. For example, if you don't get that intelligence within your purview, and basically if you don't have that visibility, so you can't obviously take the decisions you will have to take. So obviously we know all these frameworks like NIST and all, they start from the detect. When you can detect something, well, you can actually protect against it. So basically the detection is one of the key things. For example, if you don't have the visibility of number of, starting from the very basics, for example, number of assets in your organization, how many web servers you have, how many proxy servers you have, out of them, or how many servers are not patched adequately. If you don't have that visibility, if you don't have that intelligence, you will obviously have to wake up in the night. So for example, when there is a global outbreak release, it could be WannaCry kind of a ransomware attack, or it could be something totally different kind of you know, exploit-based, application-based vulnerability exploit. But if you don't have visibility whether your environment is actually vulnerable for that kind of attack, So then you will obviously don't have idea like what are the mitigation actions you will have to take. And also you need to have a better incident response plan in your environment. For example, when you came across such detection or such kind of attack, you should have at least 24/7 security operating center in place for you to take quick actions, because although we might not work round the clock, but obviously the hackers do. So they don't take zeros like us. So basically they'll be operating almost like 24/7 on a different region and different context. Nowadays actually the organizations are moving into security orchestration and automated response. Why? Because although they believe that although they have a SOC, that the response time might not adequate enough. For example, somebody from the SOC analyst detecting a incident ticket, and then he raised the ticket. Subsequently, it get escalated into based on their priority level. Then subsequently, it will go to the relevant teams. Then somebody from the firewall admin has to log into the firewall to block up a specific traffic or a malicious traffic, or antivirus or the malware protection administrator has to take different actions. Sometimes this takes a considerable amount of time. That response time even give more leverage to attack. So it's like you don't have time to think. So that's why all these security orchestration, automated response kind of concepts coming in handy, where you can actually automate certain security responses based on the playbooks you design within your organization, especially when it comes to cyber attacks based on certain critical scenarios. For example, if you know what are your crown jewels, so based on that you can come up with a better correlation rules. Based on these correlation rules, you can actually come up with a lot of what you call the playbook. The effective playbooks. Those playbooks actually help you to whenever that kind of attack or cyber, if you came across a data exfiltration scenario, if you get detected, how fast you can, how long you take to remediate, or how fast you can act upon it. So that's going to be challenging. So how sooner you act, the minimal the damage is going to be. So those kind of things actually you have to think about. And there are also practical challenges. For example, shadow IT. I would say one of the main headache for CISOs. For example, sometimes you might see some businesses coming up with their own IT infrastructure, and where it doesn't go through the formal security clearance processes, and where sometimes even IT doesn't know whether there's a particular application or a business application or a particular website has been launched or it's been running in the environment, because that does not come through the normal formal process of the bank. So shadow IT is one of the key concerns. If you don't have the adequate process in place to stop that, you will have a nightmare, because you might be in an unfortunate situation where you have to face a cyber attack, and you still don't know whether that asset is part of your organization asset inventory or the infrastructure, whereas the business themselves have taken and outsourced somebody from a external party, and they might have hosted on a cloud environment. You have no idea what other security has been included there. And apart from that, one of the key practical challenges generally we go through in an organization is the patching. So if you take the application level patching is quite challenging most of the time, because the time to test and your time to implement a patch and UAT sign-offs, all these activities, the process usually takes sometimes about 6 months in certain complicated environment. So meanwhile, during that time, the entire environment is vulnerable. So I think probably you'll have to think of virtual patching, kind of a different kind of compensating controls to cope up with these kind of issues. But those are like one of the key issues at the moment the CISOs are having, because although you can try, you can't really make a timeline for certain patches. Obviously, you can't put a patch to the live environment by breaking the business applications or by breaking your internet banking application, because obviously the functionality also is important. But if you take the time to patch and after identifying the development time to patch and the live deployment, the UAT, and then the security clearance, that's take quite a long time in enterprise level environment. And also sometimes one of the key issues as a CISO I've been facing is the poor and unmonitored configuration management, because sometimes you might not aware your IT admin might be bypassing your normal change management process and doing certain changes. And he might be bypassing your privilege access management solution and directly doing certain changes in the database, but you have no idea about it. Because when you especially working on enterprise level environment, so this poor configuration and change management is globally one of the main reason for a cyber attack, because you believe that it actually gives you a kind of a false sense of security, where you believe that your firewalls, your web application firewalls, then the proxies, even into the other layers, DDoS protection, even your malware protection, EDR configuration, everything is properly configured. Whereas the unauthorized changes being done by, for example, if you introduce to your environment the proper firewall change management tool, I don't want to mention the certain specific brand names, but there are tools you can properly control in the central environment with the proper change management workflows and all. But for an admin, when he kind of bombarded a lot of work, for him it's going to be a kind of a hassle to going through that entire process. Rather, he might choose to directly log into the firewall from the back end and do certain firewall rule changes. But what if one of the unmonitored changes got not detected and open up to totally unpredictable exposure to the external threats? So I think those are kind of things you have to as a CISOs, we really have to mindful. And also when we don't have multi-factor authentication for security admins, so that's one of the key concern, because for example, I would say in enterprise environment, all security administrators should have multi-factor authentication, because in any case of their account breach, gonna be it's mostly like a death penalty, because one of the recent attacks happened at the LK domain in Sri Lanka. So that's basically taking over an admin account. So when an attacker taking over an admin account, they'll get mostly the unlimited privileges. Through that, they can leverage their attack and leverage and basically take a lot of other parts of the information assets as well. I think those are the kind of key concerns in when it comes to CISOs. I mean, there are a lot we can discuss on this topic, but I want to highlight set the context on these few key concerns.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Sounds like you're not getting much sleep at all with that very detailed explanation. Right. To take the discussion to the next part, next step rather. I'm going to move to Shivanta. Shivanta, if you could feed back to what Suresh mentioned, the concerns he has, if you have anything else to add. And on top of that, the key question I have for you is, what are the key steps that CISO should be doing to overcome these challenges Suresh mentioned?
Thank you, Lasantha, first of all, having me here. So before I answer your question, of course, let me give a little bit of a contextual understanding of this information security function and how this information security function evolved, let's say over the last couple of decades or so. So just to kind of go through, I will kind of divide the information security functions into 3 different phases, I would say. And the first phase being let's say early part of the millennium. So if you look at information security, essentially it was part of network function that point in time. So that's the time you would see network engineers or network security engineers essentially taking care of information security functions of an organization. And that was the time you could clearly draw the demarcation, the boundaries or the perimeter of the organization. And that's when all these crown jewels also was within the perimeter. But then if you look at then the next phase, where like you see more or less a kind of increased digitalization in those organizations. So that I would call a kind of phase 2. So during phase 2, you would see like increased use of digital assets, applications. So organizations were using these applications in order to kind of tailor their business needs to meet up the customer needs, both internal as well as external customers. So in this increased digitization or increased use of applications kind of made this information security function kind of shifted towards IT. So that's where we call it IT security. So initially it was network security, but now we kind of call it or termed it as IT security. But then if you look at like, probably the latter part, the phase 3, where like, more adoption of cloud technologies and also, cloud-based infrastructure, be it PaaS, SaaS, or even infrastructure as services, you can see like, increased adoption, pretty much in every organization today. And so these all 3 phases, if you look at, it shows an evolution in terms of increased use of digitization, as well as the kind of increasing in the complexity. So this is the kind of complexity the CISOs had to deal with. Whether you call it that function CISO or something else, probably like pretty much like 2 decades before, probably maybe that function was not there. I mean, it was not so called as CISO, but still that function still exists. Yeah, but then, as I said, it exists part of network organization. Maybe it was reporting to the CTO or it was reporting to maybe CNO. But in the second phase, it pretty much resides within the IT function. So it was reporting to maybe CIO. And then the third phase, it could be CIO, it could be COO, it could be different functions the CISO or the security organization could be reporting to. But then that evolution of technology and that kind of evolution in the cybersecurity space, especially in terms of cyber attack vectors and the hacking activities, then we need to like kind of compare and see whether the same kind of changes happen in the security leadership, in the security organization. So if you look at the early days in the phase 1, in the network domain, the network engineer or network security engineers, they were pretty much taking care of the perimeter defense. They were managing the firewalls, they were managing the IDS, IPS, all these security technologies. That was good enough because the crown jewels were inside the organization. But when it comes to the second phase, again, like you can see like increased mix and use of technologies. All these technology systems were communicating with each other. Those are integrated tightly with each other, as well as in terms of access. Both internal as well as external access were prominent. So the kind of contour or that perimeter was kind of started dissolving, in phase 2. But when it comes to phase 3, again, talking about the cloud adoption and all, now we are not talking about these perimeters. We cannot draw that boundaries anymore. So it's kind of, the perimeterless organizations we are talking about. So that's where like, the security challenges also kind of exponentially increased. And that's something, CISOs had to deal with. And on the other hand, if you look at the function or the kind of background of CISOs, so early days, they're coming from technology background, that was good enough because they had to deal with all these network related issues, IT related issues, that was quite sufficient. But now, especially in that increased complexity, and CISOs still coming mostly from a technology background, or if they try to kind of meet the security, or rather like, try to find solution to security problems with a technology orientation, that's where I think, they have most of the challenges today. So that's where you need to have a kind of increased visibility, increased knowledge on the business aspects as well. And that's why we call it like, having a bird's eye view. Unless you have the business view or the bird's eye view, you'll not be able to deal with the boards. You'll not be able to deal with the executive management. So you will still be seen as a technology function. So you'll be at the corner and you will not be heard or you'll not be seen. And that's where you, mostly the CISOs find it hard to kind of put across their ideas and their point of views to the high level management. So that results in some of those security initiatives or objectives are not being fulfilled because those are not being heard or those are not being seen properly by the executive management or the board of directors. So unless and otherwise, we see a blend or kind of a balanced approach to information security from CISO point of view, both technology and the business point of view is quite crucial. So I think that's where that balanced mixture or how CISOs approach this particular problem from their own perspective kind of leads them to have, I would say, sleepless nights. So I think that's the challenge also they face, and for them to overcome that challenge, so they need to have a kind of a more business-centric approach, understanding the business better, have that business acumen, have that board's eye view, so that they can deal with the board effectively and efficiently. I think that's when you can overcome most of these challenges.
Thank you very much, Sharanda. So the repeating term I heard is the requirement to have the visibility. Without the visibility, you can't do anything. So with that, I'm going to take the conversation to a different area. Can an organization achieve compliance by subscribing to cyber insurance? Can we offload it? Dharani, I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question. So can this be offloaded to somebody? Can an organization or the CISO subscribe to a cyber insurance and just go, right, I can sleep now? And the second part of it is if you can give us a brief overview of these are the do's and don'ts when you are going for a cyber insurance. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Lasantha, for having me. So just to give a little bit of context, in the area of insurance, I have been in general insurance for a long time. Cyber insurance is actually relatively new. It's about actually only 20 years old. I started getting inquiries in Sri Lanka from about 2017 onwards. So at that point in time, people were actually interested, like banks, financial institutions, they were interested in terms of, oh, what is this new thing that, that is around? We want to, get a quote or something like that, or we want to see what is covered, what is not covered. So there was interest, but it was like, they get a proposal from overseas, and when they look at it, they and most of the, the CISOs and the IT people, they say, no, we are very well, structured. I don't think we are going to get hacked. This is like too expensive, or it's like not required. So that was prior to 2019. So 2020 actually. So COVID comes, then there is a lot of interest even locally. Then what happened was there was a kind of a underwriting restrictions coming from London, places where you obtain quotations. That Sri Lanka and some of the Asian countries, it was like really difficult to source those quotations because we were not the most how do you say the favored jurisdictions, let's say. So since then, it has been actually been quite tough to get to work with them, and I'll go into the reasons. And to answer your first question, whether you can be compliant by subscribing to cyber insurance, the very clear and short answer is no, because cyber insurance is not something that you can compensate for proper security infrastructure, obviously. In fact, if you have proper infrastructure, it's much more easier to get cyber insurance than when you're not. I have seen more companies in Sri Lanka get declined or rejected than actually get a yes from the reinsurance market. Because if your security is lacking, that means inevitably you're very vulnerable and you are likely to give claims. So obviously, reinsurance or the insurance market, they do want to pay claims, but they want to pay it in the right conditions. It's like having, think about motor insurance, to think very simply. If you do not do your maintenance properly, your servicing, it's likely that you will, your motor insurance premium will be more expensive than somebody who's maintaining the car very well. And motor insurance is mostly for people who meet with accidents. And accidents means accidental negligence. It's not by will, it's not by, forcing something to happen, but it's something that, happens in a very natural way. So the same principle actually applies even to cyber insurance. And your second question is actually more loaded because there are certain do's and don'ts, obviously, when you go to approach cyber insurance market, because there is like a lot of preparatory work to be done. It's not like subscribing for a motor insurance or a house insurance or even a building insurance. It is done very, very differently. And the current market situation in Sri Lanka and the dollar payment issues has also complicated the issue actually. So I think the first thing that one must do is to get a little bit of knowledge about what the product is, because most people are quite clueless as to when it comes to, what is exactly covered by cyber insurance. They think anything and everything is covered. Anything to do with the hardware, any financial crimes, anything is covered, which is really, really not the case because it's fairly well structured. So first thing one must do is talk to somebody in the insurance market, and actually insurance brokers, corporate insurance brokers are more suited for this conversation. It's somebody who understands what both Suresh and Shiranta were talking about a little bit on the cybersecurity side. Because if you do not understand, then you cannot have an intelligent conversation, and then you cannot actually be the go-between between the insurance, reinsurance company and the organization. So best thing is to have a chat, and they will let you know as to what can be, especially from a jurisdiction like Sri Lanka, what can be done and what cannot be done. The first thing that one can do is, like if you ask me, I can give you a couple of questionnaires which you can go through and try to figure out whether you have any gaps. Because the reinsurance market is driven by reinsurers who are based in either in the US or in the London market. And mostly for Sri Lankan insurance market, for cyber, we go to the London market because that's like the market which caters to this part of the world, because it's highly centralized and you get all the big boys like AIG, Lloyd's, Chubb, Swiss Re, Munich Re, all of them in concentrated in the London hub. So what happens is, if you send a loose questionnaire with like yes, no answers, which is like the way people fill questionnaires for any other insurance, the chances are that it will not meet the required standard. Because cyber reinsurers, the market is actually driven by reinsurers, not insurers. I mean, in Sri Lanka, you hardly get any insurance companies writing. So we have to approach the reinsurance market. So what happens is, they are looking at international standards. They are benchmarking the best with the best. So if the information pack that we send with regard to a client here is lacking, then it's going to be a bit of an issue. Since it's a small market, if you approach it in a not suitable way, the chances are, even if you go to another source, your application has already been recorded in the market. So what happens is, if there has been a decline or very strict terms have been applied, the chances are nobody else might want to take a look at it, because each proposal form takes a lot of time. So what happens is, when it goes to the market, it goes through various scanning processes. So they will ask you a lot of information where they can do vulnerability scans and kind of non-invasive scanning to take a look at it. So if it doesn't appeal to them, then the chances are they are not going to waste too much of time with the application. So generally we find with regard to the Sri Lankan risks, as we say, if we can provide cybersecurity consultants independent view of the risk, benchmarking with various standards and like NIST and standards like that as to where you are, that really helps. And also it helps if and these are some, actually Suresh kind of raised a couple of things which reinsurers look into. One is they look into identity management very closely and access management. MFA is super crucial. I have seen reinsurers, if the questionnaire or the proposal form says that you don't have MFA, they don't even take it beyond that. Then visibility and response is key. These are the areas that they will check in the questionnaire. Policy, standards, regulations, certifications, frameworks, then compliance with GDPR and PII and all those, then training of staff, super important, because that's the most vulnerable area, and that seems to be the 80 to 85% of insurance related claims actually comes as a result of employees clicking on the wrong link most of the time. Then network security, endpoint security is super important now. I recently saw one questionnaire where they said, if this is not there, your cost is going to be really high, like 200-300%. They just mark up. It's that high. So then the subscription models, SaaS, platform, infrastructure, all those things, and the security with related to that really matters. So these are the things that I come across in various proposal forms that I see as like really important. Email filtering, business continuity, data classification, encryption, backups, then the professional qualifications that people have in the security unit. So these are some of the things that come out, and if you don't have like full answers to these things, then it actually becomes a problem to get covered. These days I'm getting more rejections or declines, and actually people that being proposals being accepted. Then I would say, once you get all this information ready, we can kind of we will go through, and then only we send it to the reinsurance market, because otherwise, if it does go and it gets declined, for a long time, for a long period of time, reinsurers don't want to take a look at it. So now what we tell is we don't hurry customers to send application forms to the market unless you have like a even if you don't have all the security infrastructure ready. What they want to see is whether you understand the gaps, whether you have a timeline to implement whatever that you have to implement, and whether you have the budgets approved for these things. So if you have like a rationalized explanation of this, then it's so much easier to get a proposal from London. Then selecting, I think, your broker, your insurance broker, or your insurance partner, I think that is like really key. You will have to, especially the CISOs level, or the alternatives, or people who are in charge of security, will have to have a chat with the relevant people to see, whether these guys understand, whether these are guys reliable. So you will have to make up your mind about that actually. Because you get all sorts of people in the market, because the premiums are big and it's very attractive, and people tend to get carried away. So if you don't approach it properly, you might end up with a shell of a policy which might not really help you at the time of a claim, and that is not something that you want to experience. What else? Yeah, and also when you another thing that really is where reinsurers get confused and it becomes a problem is when you have approached several brokers or insurance companies to approach the market. So you have to understand, if you have approached about 5 people because you want to get 5 different quotations, you go to the same market. you know, it's the AIGs and the Beasleys and the Lloyds, you know, who are going to, you know, and very likely most of them have already seen it. So I would say just select just, you know, 2 or 3 and have like, you know, reasonable, intelligent conversations to kind of, you know, make up your mind as to whom you want to work with. I think that is like super important, because otherwise you confuse the market. And I have a lot of issues where certain institutions, they have been going around without actually seriously considering the cover. So the moment you go, they say, oh, this guy's shopping again, you know. So that's the kind of, you know, impression that the market might have about a certain institution. So they don't get very serious. So I think the information pack has to demonstrate certain attitude, a certain posture of how serious you are. It has to demonstrate the resilience. It has to demonstrate how serious you are about, you know, cyber insurance. And yeah, so those are some of the things that I have come across in Sri Lanka with regard to the, you know, do's and don'ts. Basically approach it in a very, you know, sensible way.
Thank you very much, Dharani, for that very detailed explanation. Well, from the conversation goes, I do not see the CEOs sleeping well anytime soon, because they have a bigger job to do, even with the insurance companies there to help them. But there is a significant amount of work for them to do still. So with that, the one key thing I was hearing from Dharani is that while we are in Sri Lanka, we have to adhere to the benchmarking of the European insurers. We might have gotten away with these are our local standards, and we don't have to align to those in the past, but not anymore. So I would like to go to Suresh. As a consumer, what is your experience on this aspect? Have you been bitten, or is it easy enough to manage? What is your experience like?
Yeah, so you are talking about in terms of the cyber insurance perspective?
Exactly. As a client in Sri Lanka, when you are trying to get to the insurers, they are asking you to adhere to the European standards, and to get that, is it an easy enough task for you to perform, or is it, how difficult is it?
Yeah, so if we take generally when it comes to cyber insurance kind of engagement, when we start with the reinsurer, so generally they actually evaluate in detail and very depth and very methodical way of analyzing the risk exposure of an organization. So basically they start from the board of directors to the asset base of the particular organization, into then they dive up to the as Dhanri mentioned, about up to the level whether your administrators have multi-factor authentication, whether you have encryption, so whether you have EDR or the endpoint detection and response installed in your computers, and what is the and also I've seen sometimes they go up to who is the particular solution provider, the name, whether that solution provider is already on the Gartner's highest leaders quadrant. They even go up to that level. So apart from that, when it comes to the certain standards, they most of the time what I've seen is they really check whether we are mostly complied with the international benchmarks such as the NIST framework, ISC2 7001. If you are a bank, especially PCI DSS, then nowadays they used to check the GDPR compliance as well. So, but we generally, since we already have our own bill, the Sri Lankan version of the data protection bill, so we can actually, comment on the compliance level of that particular local standard. But I assume they accept that because the GDPR is not really much prevalent in our country unless you have considerable amount of EU customers. So I think those kind of sometimes, yes, you can't really keep up with all these, global big giant companies' level of security in the when you compare the economic of scales, a country like us, and especially when it comes to security investments and all. But still, you have to prove that you have a reasonable level of security. At least you have your baselines and the minimal compliance is you are adhered to the minimum compliance. You have to ensure and you have to demonstrate that to even for them to even to consider you. Otherwise, they won't even consider you. That's my experience with the insurance report.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. Right. With that, I'm going back to Shiranta. Shiranta earlier mentioned that it is important to have the board's support on this. So, of course, Dharani mentioned that we have to have these certain things in place. And one of the things she mentioned is, does the company have the budget approved? So the moment we talk about money, we have to think about how do we get the management buy-in. So Shiranta, if you could elaborate a bit on how can we approach this to the board? How can we get the management buy-in to make one's organization secure?
Yeah, sure. I think as Dharani mentioned, it's quite important, for us to understand that cyber insurance is not a kind of a justification, for CISOs to just fold their hands and then do nothing. Because again, part of the cyber insurance process as well, cyber insurance companies will essentially assess, the kind of cybersecurity hygiene and the cybersecurity capabilities of the organization. As both Dharani and then also Suresh mentioned, they will look at definitely the patch management, identity management, even information leakage, what are the aspects or protections you have in terms of data protection. So all these elements, and then even incident management, security monitoring, I mean, those are, some of the essential elements, they would look into. So again, so you need to have kind of basic security principles or security controls and practices in place. So once you have those security practices and principles in place, definitely you still see there are certain risks which resides within the organization, certain business risks, certain technological risks, and you see sometimes the cost of probably dealing with those risks kind of outweigh the kind of the resultant business benefits out of it. So in that situations, probably go ahead and then deal with those scenarios technically or technologically may not be the the kind of quite the kind of way forward. So that's where probably some organizations might look into kind of cyber insurance as a a kind of a treatment option, because again part of risk we are talking about different types of risk treatment. So insurance is one such way. So if we can kind of go to the board and tell them, okay, we see there are certain risks exist, and then at the same time the cost of probably mitigating those risks technically or even organization wide, it's kind of gonna cost us a fortune. So it's not kind of going to justify that cost in terms of what we are trying to kind of mitigate. And in that situations, yes, we can go ahead and then consider cyber insurance as one of the prospective avenue, because in that case, of course, yes, once we make that particular there's a step towards insurance, and then we'll be covered or protected in certain elements as long as we made the minimal kind of basic requirements that we can fulfill, or at least we can endorse to the cyber insurance companies. So if they are happy, yes, this company has that kind of required maturity, yes, then we can consider them to be insured, and this is the insurance premium. So with that, again, go and approach the board, give the kind of necessary figures to kind of justify, yes, this is the way forward, or this is one of the way forward, rather than dealing with the problem. So I think that's, of course, the board gonna listen to this problem, because they see there are business benefits also following this approach, rather than trying to go and mitigate in some way. As I said, it could be even economically viable, it could be cost effective, even sometimes to follow this direction. So you see certain business benefits also as part of it. So then you have to see how exactly this will quantify, and then address it accordingly, go and kind of pitch into the board, and then get the necessary buy-in. I think that's still feasible, as long as you kind of approach them properly.
Thank you very much, Shiranta. Right. That has been a decent explanation of how we should be approaching the board when it comes to budgeting. If I go to Dharani again as a closing thought, Dharani, what would you say to the CISOs out there when they are trying to approach cyber insurance? What should they be doing differently going forward? If you can summarize a couple of steps for them to memorize, like 1, 2, 3, do this, do that, do that.
One thing I would say is kind of prepare yourself. Go through a couple of questionnaires. Like people like us will have proposal forms or application forms, questionnaires, whatever you call it, from different reinsurance companies, because no single reinsurer has very standardized versions of proposal forms. So each one has slight different nuances. So I would probably recommend take a couple of those, go through them. And finally, if we prefer, generally we try to go with the AIG one because that's fairly comprehensive. So then and fill it up in a way like you're doing a very important exam. You know what I mean? Showcase yourself really, really well. Try to back it up with an independent report as well. Reinsurers are not looking for perfect risk, but they are looking for well-managed risk. People who understand, who are mature, who understand the weaknesses of their own systems. They can make time plans and bind the management approval for various budgets. If you come across as somebody who who's able to manage that area, I think that goes a long way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dharani. Suresh, if I come to you with the same question, what is your advice to the fellow CISOs, if you can point few for them to memorize?
Okay, so I would say nowadays the CISO is considered as no more like a much of a technical person, much also kind of also in the today's context considered as one of the digital business leader. So, I would say they closely, collaborate with other business leaders within the organization, understand their business goals, create a culture within the C-level. You can be a cybersecurity and information security evangelist within the organization, and you can create internal and external awareness within the organization. So that which will, when you have that culture going on, it's easy to get things done. So then business won't see you as a, kind of a barricade where somebody coming with a checklist to do certain lot of things when the business is trying to do certain things. That buy-in is really important. Then, apart from the, basically understanding your business goals and articulating kind of aligned security strategy, a roadmap, not only a roadmap, you need to consider certain quick wins apart from your long-term projects. And also the prioritization really matters because you don't, obviously, none of us will have unlimited budget. So you'll have to prioritize on certain security investments. And also you need to mindful that, you need to understand and be mindful that security is not always an investment. How much you leverage with your existing investments. So if you have SIEM, what is the percentages you are leveraging on it? So for example, whether you at least you are 90% of your, whether you are leveraging on the features of your SIEM, how much you are leveraging on the firewall, the capabilities. So you can buy without any additional investment. By leveraging them to the maximum level alone, you will be improving about probably about a significant amount of security cost in your organization. So I think those kind of things. Apart from that, I would say consider the kind of developing unified goals, objectives, KPIs. So that will make sure that you are kind of going through a particular articulated plan, and you show the continual improvement. When someone like a cyber insurance service provider comes into an environment, you can show that, okay, this is how we started, and this is where we are, and this is what we are planning to do, and this is where we will be going within the next couple of years. This is the standard and compliance level we are planning to go ahead with. So this is our roadmap on that. So that plan has to be there. Then only they'll see you, as Daniel really correctly mentioned, you should be in a person kind of a well manage your risk, and also obviously you need to make sure that you are 100% compliance to all your statutory and regulatory requirements, including the new upcoming certain new standards like the Data Protection Act of Sri Lanka. So you need to be mindful of that, what your regulators are wanted from you, and also make sure that there could be certain penalties if you breach, if certain things go wrong, whether your board of directors are aware of it, and whether your board of directors are aware of what are their responsibilities. If you, for example, in the banking industry, there's a cyber technology resilience directive being issued by the regulator, but that directive clearly says, if you won't believe if I tell this also, I mean, that directive, it go up to the level where if you are exempting a server from a penetration testing exercise, your board of directors should approve it. Can you imagine the level? So that's mean the board of directors should aware, I have this amount of servers in my environment, and out of that, this server we are accepting because of this reason, probably a performance issue or maybe some other issue, that should be approved by the board of directors. But all this time we never doing that. We might be taking the scores by our own. That means when you are taking these kind of problems to the board of directors, can you imagine the level of awareness you have to kind of create within the board of directors to when you even to discuss a matter like that within the board of directors? I mean, so it's getting harder. It's getting, it's demand your knowledge. It's demand more and more out of you. So I think you have to always ensure that you have to keep up to date as well. So I think those are my key takeaways for CISO.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Shivanta, I'm going to come to you with the same question. In your opinion, what are the advice that you are going to give to fellow CISOs?
Yeah, so as I said, again, CISO is a strategic role. So again, you'll be dealing with certain tactical and operational matters as well, or in certain organization, those will be dealt by maybe another C-level or in a different function within the organization. But more or less, that strategic role of security needs to be, exercised by the CISOs. And that's why most of the CISOs or CISO organizations, we see it's not having that many, let's say, individuals or let's say headcounts over there, because they're supposed to pretty much look into or drive the roadmap or the the initiatives or the strategic objectives of the organization. And also even Suresh also mentioned, and even earlier I mentioned as well, the kind of the CISO's role to have a kind of a balanced overview of both technological as well as the business aspects of the organization. And just to kind of highlight one example, even Suresh mentioned, for example, about shadow IT. So we can look at this shadow IT or the problem of shadow IT in two different perspectives. The one is why it's happening, why this type of assets are being added to the organization. Okay, it's because probably you may say we don't have proper inventory, or someone who is managing the inventory is not doing their role. Or if you look at it's from a slightly different perspective, maybe it could be a reason maybe the CISOs or the organization had not identified the real business needs. So that's why sometimes the staff or employees are being compelled to bring their own devices or kind of install their own applications to support the business objectives or business functions. So that's where I was talking about that kind of business resiliency or understanding of the business knowledge or business aspects. Also, if the CISOs had the kind of proper business understanding, this type of shadow IT could be kind of even eliminated from the business point of view. Because if the CISO were able to identify those business needs in a kind of a proactive manner, then all those business needs should be catered or could be catered. And maybe the requirement to have this type of unwanted or unrecognized assets part of the inventory or part of the business the landscape could have been avoided by following such approach. So that's why again I'm stressing up CISO's function is strategic, and then they need to have a balanced approach both in terms of business as well as in terms of technological aspects. And then they could have avoided all this kind of getting into difficulties. For example, even recently, yes, we were talking about Uber. breach, not the recent one, the one back in 2016, where Joe Sullivan, the then CSO, was convicted recently for covering up, that sort of, the cyber attack which happened at Uber. So all these things, like, which may not probably had happened if they had thought of, like, how to deal with such scenarios, if they had kind of, a clear-cut way of responding, to those requirements, because especially in the US, like, it's a mandatory requirement for you to kind of announce, that sort of security breach, without being hiding. So that's a must. So the organization should kind of gear up, to kind of meet those requirements, be it business requirement, be it strategic requirements, be it part of vision or mission, or even environmental requirement. When I'm saying environmental requirement, the compliance or the regulatory, specific requirements coming out of the organization, but still the organizations are supposed to, like, enforce, or rather, like, kind of follow, those jurisdictions and requirements properly. So if they fail, which shows that they were not prepared enough, they were not kind of, having the business resilience or business knowledge or the environment where they operate. So having that kind of knowledge, having that kind of business understanding, having that environmental understanding at the CISO level is quite requirement, is quite mandatory in today's world. And this way, I think, yes, we can kind of deal with today's, CISO problems or security problems much more effective and efficient way, and also probably have a much more, or much better sleep, at night for CISOs.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Shiranta, for that. Okay, this has been a very interesting conversation. Dharani, Suresh, Shiranta, I thank you all for giving us a wonderful discussion, and it is quite insightful. I hope our audience find it insightful as well. So, on behalf of ISC2 Colombo chapter, I thank you all, and the audience, thank you very much for taking time to watch us. Thank you all. We'll close it off now. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.